Beneath layers of age-old earth, archaeologists lifted the lid on a past few had dared to touch. What emerged wasn't just stone and dust. It was a Byzantine complex of roughly 1.5 dunums on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, possibly ancient Bethsaida, hometown of Peter, Andrew, and Philip. At the heart of the ruin, a short Greek inscription, intact after 15 centuries of silence, hails Peter as the chief of the apostles and keeper of the keys to the kingdom. Before we go on, hit subscribe and tap the bell so every new episode lands right on time, and none of this journey slips by. That detail, set into a mosaic so vivid it looks freshly laid, rekindles debates that span Christian history. If this declaration was planted here on the land where the ministry began, who else might have read it and passed it on? Every tessera, every syllable acts like a theological seismograph, shifting arguments that echo from Rome to Jerusalem. Researchers are calling the find the biggest biblical revelation since the space age. It doesn't just redraw archaeological maps, it moves the battle lines over apostolic authority. While scholars hash it out at conferences, the site still smells of damp earth, reminding us that faith sometimes leaves traces as concrete as fossils. And here's something even more provocative. If this inscription stayed hidden for so many centuries, what other voices lie buried, waiting to be heard? Stay tuned. Every fragment of Galilean soil might carry a new question, and no certainty is forever. Where was the village that watched Peter, Andrew, and Philip grow up? For generations, that question hovered over maps and biblical commentaries. The decisive clue surfaced on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee, when the team of Mordecai Aviam and Stephen Notley peeled back soil layers that seemed sealed by time itself. In the dark bed below, they found walls of a Byzantine basilica, and on its floor, mosaics whose shine hadn't faded in 14 centuries. Right in the center, a coin Greek inscription leaves no room for doubt. It calls Peter chief of the apostles and key holder of the kingdom, exactly as in Matthew 16:19. Whoever laid those tesserae wanted the world to know that this ground was Bethsaida, the launch pad of a fisherman-turned-leader. The text is so sharp it looks brand new. Crisp lines, solid colors, not a single letter missing. It's as if the dust served as a vault, guarding the message until the right technology could unlock it. Now every fragment reshapes discussions on sacred geography, giving scholars and pilgrims an address where narrative, tradition, and hard evidence meet by the lake that heard Christ teach. Who would have guessed such a long silence hid such clear answers? When archaeologists cleaned the freshly exposed mosaic at El Araj, the team fell silent. Among tiny blue glass tiles they read, "Most Holy Apostle Peter." Suddenly, centuries of debate gained a solid foothold, and seasoned experts didn't hide their amazement. Craig Evans, a leading scholar of the historical Jesus, said this might be the most direct archaeological link yet to Peter's house. Co-director Stephen Notley was blunt. It's not just the artwork. The piece confirms the church, the town, and the people. The pieces finally fit. To grasp why this matters so much, you have to go back to Bethsaida, the fishing village whose Aramaic name means house of the fishermen. Here were born men who spent their days casting nets until a Galilean teacher crossed their path and changed their course. The Gospels record pivotal scenes in the city. A blind man regains sight, Mark 8:22. Crowds are fed with a few loaves and fish, Luke 9:10-17. And on nearby waters, Jesus walks on the lake. Yet this same city received a rare public rebuke from Jesus. After that, its name vanishes not only from the New Testament, but also from historical records. For centuries, scholars scoured maps and ruins for its whereabouts. Now, each glass fragment glittering in the sun seems to line up evidence that could solve one of biblical archaeology's most persistent puzzles. For centuries, the lost city's location was drowned in doubt. In the Middle Ages, devout travelers followed scattered hints in chants and prayers, but returned frustrated. The land seemed to have swallowed not just the homes, but a living part of the Gospels. In the 19th century, German and American scholars bet on Et Tel, a mound almost 2 kilometers from the lake. The theory lost steam for 2 reasons: the distance from the water, awkward for a fishing community, and the lack of clear first-century Roman remains. Before we go on, hit subscribe and tap the bell so every new episode lands right on time, and none of this journey slips by. The picture changed after the Six-Day War in 1967. With the area accessible again, Israeli teams resumed surveys and began highlighting El Araj, a marshy plain on the Sea of Galilee's shore. There, shards of pottery, glass, and mosaic mapped a continuous occupation across the centuries. Each layer removed fit past and present together like puzzle pieces, keeping experts and onlookers in suspense. In the 2000s, the dig drew global attention. John Paul II flew over the site, greeted the archaeologists, and as a gift received a replica of a bronze key found there, a direct symbol of Peter's authority. The gesture rang like a bell, attracting academics, pilgrims, and tourists who have followed every update with the same eagerness as medieval seekers. The promise recorded in Matthew 16 spans centuries and resurfaces on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. In 2016, an archaeological team backed by the University of Nebraska at Omaha arrived at El Araj in search of ancient Bethsaida. During the very first season, Roman coins and first-century tools surfaced, signs that the place was buzzing at Christianity's dawn. 2 years later, something bigger turned up: the foundations of a Byzantine basilica, remains of a bathhouse, rooms for pilgrims, and a broad public courtyard. The most electrifying discovery, though, was hidden in the Greek mosaics. Amid geometric patterns, one inscription asks prayers for Constantine, not the emperor but a local patron, and hails Peter as leader of the apostles, guardian of the keys to heaven. These words echo the account of the Bavarian bishop Willibald, who wrote in 725 that he had slept in a church dedicated to Peter and Andrew in Bethsaida. For decades, scholars dismissed his note as legendary devotion. Now the stones whisper otherwise. Beneath layers of Galilean soil and centuries of floods, the building waited in silence for sharp eyes to decode its story. Every block that sees daylight returns the boldness of early faith to the world, and keeps the next page of this discovery hanging in suspense. In 2016, when shovels cut into the ground at El Araj, the uncertainties swirling around the site started to take solid shape. Just below the surface lay a corridor of overlapping eras. Byzantine foundations set atop even older Roman ruins. The dig pointed to an entire complex, not just a church. There was a bathhouse for purification rituals, no-frills dorms for travelers worn out from pilgrimage routes, and at the center, the nave where prayers echoed while empires rose and fell. Before we go on, hit subscribe and turn on the bell so every new chapter reaches you right on time and none of this journey slips by. The site had stayed silent for centuries, but the stones themselves were ready to speak. Between chips and dust, 3 Greek inscriptions surfaced in mosaics that, even worn, still catch the light. 2 broke apart into fragments. The third, almost intact, sits inside a ring of tesserae that draws the eye like an unavoidable target. It reads, "Intercede for him and his children." Few words, enormous weight. The formula isn't generic. It calls Peter chief of the apostles and bearer of the keys, titles that point to Matthew 16:19 and confer authority, not mere remembrance. This brief text links the ground under our feet to the theology that shaped centuries of faith, reminding us that even when civilizations fall, humanity's search for meaning stays etched, mosaic after mosaic, right beneath us. From the earliest centuries, the image of the keys in Isaiah 22:22 was understood as a sign of singular succession and stewardship. No wonder Byzantine Christians leaned on lofty titles to honor Peter, and by extension, the place devoted to him. The recent find of a buried basilica in Bethsaida confirms this reading with fresh force. In the middle of the nave, a dedication stone turned up, repeating almost word for word the theology of the keys. The discovery speaks directly to Willibald's report that, in 725, he spent the night in a lakeside temple dedicated to Peter and Andrew, where pilgrims found shelter and liturgical celebration. For a long time, his testimony was greeted with caution, taken as the pious exaggeration of a medieval traveler. Yet the match between text and archaeological traces, from the floor plan to guest quarters, turns that old narrative into first-hand evidence. Beneath the soil, the church preserved not just names and prayers. It kept living memory, protected generations of faith, and hands us today a rare link where written tradition and tangible stone intertwine almost palpably. A dig can reveal far more than ancient stones. It can open a door into the very timeline of belief. When archaeologists flag a site, the echoing question isn't just "what is this?" but "why does this change everything?" Finding church remains would already be striking, but uncovering a temple built directly over a first-century village, the same one the Gospels describe as home to Peter, Andrew, and Philip, completely reshapes the picture. This isn't a casual alignment or a devotional legend. It's an unbroken line of memory rising from the ground, recorded in stone architecture and the communal practice of the earliest Christians. The basilica at El Araj, likely raised in the 5th or 6th century, wasn't placed at random. Jesus' first followers didn't scatter churches across the map. They chose spots loaded with testimony where they could say, "God acted here." That intentionality repeats all over the Holy Land and serves as a map for anyone hunting contact points between the biblical text and real geography. Every stone lifted, every footing exposed, reinforces the idea that sacred history lives not only on pages, but also in the terrain where the community kept alive the memory of what it believed it had seen and heard. Before we go on, hit subscribe and turn on the bell so every new chapter reaches you right on time and none of this journey slips by. Bethlehem crowns the grotto believed to be Jesus' birthplace with the Basilica of the Nativity. In Jerusalem, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre surrounds the revered site of crucifixion and resurrection. Nazareth hosts the Basilica of the Annunciation, a living reminder of the angel's message to Mary. That geography seemed complete until Bethsaida, long erased from devotional maps, came back into the light-bearing signs of the same sacred memory. Whoever built a church there had no probes or carbon-14 dating. They trusted a tradition passed by word of mouth and an inner cartography where faith and land blended. The memory of events was still fresh enough to guide the foundations. The excavations at El Araj confirm that hunch. Coins, pottery, fishhooks, and basalt walls outline a fishing village bustling in the 1st century. This isn't an empty backdrop, but real lives. Nets cast along the lake, noisy bargaining in the market, sunburned faces. In that daily grind, Peter's voice may have echoed, the man to whom Jesus promised the keys of the kingdom. And it's no accident the unearthed church bears his name. Each fragment raised from the soil, then, is an invite to revisit the start of the Christian story and follow the next chapters archaeology may yet uncover. Such a find stirs even those who step into churches only to admire stained glass. Among the ancient tesserae of a Galilean temple appears a phrase that breaks the mold. Peter is greeted not just as saint or apostle, but as chief of the apostles. The mosaic uses the Greek word koryphaios, a term early Christians understood as undeniable leadership, the top spot among the 12. The detail is striking because it wasn't born in Rome or written in Latin. It came from Byzantine craftsmen who worked centuries before the Great Schism, right near the region where Peter walked. That shows the primacy given to him didn't spring from a late papal decree. It was already rooted in the thinking of the young Eastern and Western communities of faith. And the mosaic doesn't stop there. Just below you read another title, Keeper of the Keys to the Heavenly Kingdom. This isn't liturgical flourish. It's a direct quote from Matthew 16:19, where Jesus gives Peter authority to bind and loose on earth and in heaven. That verse fueled councils, fired up Reformation debates, and still echoes in catechisms. Finding it carved in stone in Peter's homeland by hands that lived centuries before those disputes adds a historic weight you can't ignore. So the mosaic works like a time capsule. Right in the soil of the first communities, it confirms Peter as a point of convergence and steady authority in building the church. Before we go on, hit subscribe and ring the bell so every new chapter lands right on time and nothing on this journey slips by. When the first Christians gathered along the shores of the Sea of Galilee, one name always came up when they thought back to the days with Jesus: Peter. He wasn't mentioned as just another member of the group, but as the one the Master had given a unique mission. The liturgies and stories that came before any formal theology show the early community saw that fisherman as the manager chosen to clear the way and guard the flock. That view crystallizes in the episode of the keys of the kingdom. In the ancient East, keys meant way more than metal in locks. They stood for delegated authority. Whoever held the palace keys ruled when the king was away. Isaiah 22:22 shows Eliakim carrying the key to David's house, shutting and opening doors no one could override. When Jesus picks up that symbol and hands it to Peter, he draws an unmistakable parallel. He trusts the apostle not just to proclaim but to safeguard God's house. Critics cite Matthew 18:18 to argue the same authority was spread among all the disciples. It's true they all get the power to bind and loose, but the detail about the keys stays solely with Peter. In that subtle yet decisive difference lies the point that, for almost 2,000 years, has shaped identities and fueled debates within Christianity, keeping alive the question of who carries the weight of those keys today. When archaeologists lifted the freshly exposed slab at El Araj, what appeared echoed Matthew 16. The stone gives Peter the title Guardian of Heaven's Keys, carved right into Galilean ground. Proof that the link between Peter and succession authority wasn't born in Rome's halls or medieval debates. Centuries before papal crowns and long before the East-West split, the Byzantine community was already honoring that unique role. Scripture, tradition, and memory weave together in those few carved lines, forming a thread that stitches time to faith. If you're looking for a direct defense of the modern papacy, the stone alone might not be enough. Even so, it plants the Catholic reading in solid historic soil. More than a curious artifact, the find suggests the idea of Peter as the Church's visible face sprang from a widespread, ancient, resilient conviction that crossed empires, languages, and rites. For non-Catholics, the inscription doesn't force belief, but it does throw out a challenge. Faced with such an early witness far from the centers of power, is it fair to brush off questions of leadership and unity and move on without thinking? Maybe it's worth listening to the whisper of this stone, which outlasts the centuries, to insist on Peter's relevance and the place so many gave him. The dig began as just another routine job on the Sea of Galilee's shore, but a glint of tesserae soon halted the shovels. Up from the earth came an intact mosaic displaying a name that's echoed for 2 millennia: Peter. It wasn't just a decorative detail. The inscription spoke of the authority the apostle held for the first Christians. Every letter, preserved against time, rang like a reminder that the newborn church's memory was right there, carved in stone. The discovery goes beyond topography or archaeological technique. It links first-century dust to our own era, spanning empires, cultural shifts, and modern doubts about trusting sacred traditions. When so many wonder whether the biblical story stands up to critical analysis, those stones answer with a firm voice, not as argument, but as a tangible fact that demands attention. Think about the impact. Written records can be challenged, but the earth itself insists on speaking. With every cleared inch, Peter's authority reappears, uniting scripture and soil, faith and science. This isn't about proving something already believed, but about facing what this fragment from the past puts before us. If the ground confirms the memory, what other testimony still lies hidden, waiting to be revealed? If this discovery struck a chord with you, stick around. There's plenty more to uncover. Drop a like, share it with anyone who will enjoy this journey, and come back for the next chapter as we keep digging up ancient voices that travel through time. See you soon. God bless.